Black Boy Joy, 17 stories celebrating Black boyhood, and is dedicated to the ones they called angry, broken, sad, and hopeless, but were silent amidst your joy. And I just want to read a few pages um, of The Griot of Grover Street. It opens up homegoing. That's what Fort's mother and Aunt Jess and Mimi called it, homegoing. Sounded fun, actually, like returning to your own bedroom after sleeping over your cousin's house for a week, or a party at 3 p.m. every day when school let out to celebrate being done with classes. That would have been cool. But homegoing meant something different. It meant a funeral. And then it goes on to talk about Aunt Netta, and it's just written with so much depth and understanding of our culture. And this piece is the opening piece in Black Boy Joy, and it is by the editor himself. Let me welcome him to the show, Mr. Kwame Mbalia. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Man, I appreciate this. Earlier this summer, I talked with Angie Thomas and the women that came together to write Blackout, which is a celebration of Black joy. In the midst of a blackout, there's no cops, there's no police brutality, no racism. It's just young people being Black in America. For a lot of young people, they never just get to be children. So I appreciate this. And if you have a son in particular, this is a must have. But what inspired you, Kwame, to put this piece together?
To be perfectly honest, it came together as a lot of my books do, because of multiple reasons. One, a lot of the contributors in the book, I had always wanted to work with them. I remember seeing Jerry Craft. I was at the Coretta Scott King Awards in 2019 when Varian Johnson was, an author honor and spoke very touchingly. He talked directly to his two daughters. Jason Reynolds was there. Justin Reynolds, I saw him as well. Lamar Giles. So I saw all of these different authors, and I was like, man, I love your work. I love your work. I love your work. I would love to be able to do something, right? To do some sort of anthology together. And then over the summer of 2020, amidst the rage and the fury over Breonna Taylor and over George Floyd and over all of this kind of, once again, we are out here yelling and demanding to be heard, and it feels like no one was listening. There's all of this rage. And then you see all of these labels placed upon, violent, they're angry, they should have done that, they should have done this for these Black people who were dead now and not allowed to defend themselves, right? And I just remember growing up and I see, Trayvon, right? And I see all of these other people who are not able to defend themselves and assign these labels. And I'm like, that's the reason for the dedication. I'm like, speaking to the media, you were so quick to talk about us and to present us in this light, and yet when we're out here dapping each other up, smiling, laughing, handing out plates left and right at the repast, right, with no questions asked, come get some of this food, come get some of this love, come get some of this joy, where were you then, right? And so for me, this book was an attempt to give someone like myself who was afraid to turn on the news, as I say in my introduction, it was an attempt to give them notification, to give them the message that, hey, I see you when you're happy, and I'm shouting at you, I'm rolling down my window like, I see you, young blood out there, you just hit that flip, you thought nobody was watching, but I saw you, I know how hard you've been working every day after school, so just you can bust it out on the playground and impress your friends. I see you hustling out there, I see you running to make the bus, right, so you're not late to class. I see you and you're valid. That's what this book is. It's really just a message to those children, but specifically to those Black boys out there who might not get that message when they need it most.
Yeah, Kwame, I'm wondering, how do you navigate the process of pulling the book together? When we think about young boys that are 8 to 12, young kings that are 8 to 12 years old, consumed by video games and Snapchat and TikTok and maybe some of the other things that I just don't know about. How do you navigate bringing a book together and still winning the way that you have consistently done over the years, because you've done exceptionally well?
I mean, I'm fortunate enough to kind of to have a pulse on what's happening right now. And then,
I mean, but that's interesting when you say a pulse. Like, do you have young kings that are helping feed you? Like, when you say a pulse, that's a very interesting categorization of connectedness.
I have young queens. I have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old, right?
All right.
And so they're keeping me abreast of kind of like the social dynamics, what's happening, what's in, what's not, what's like, come on, dad, calm down with that. That was like 2 years ago. We're past that now. We're beyond that, right? So they keep me, energetic and within, and on the pulse, right? And then it's tapping into what I remember and what I think every generation around that age, that middle grade age, struggles with, right? This idea of we're learning that there is a world bigger than us, bigger than, my family, my uncles, my cousins, right? Bigger than my hood, bigger than my block. There's a world out there. And we're learning about that. We're hearing what our parents are talking about at the table when they're thinking we're not listening, right? We're seeing what's happening on the news, and we are trying to process that in sometimes the only ways that we know how. Sometimes that's over Snapchat, TikTok, Discord, or Slack, right? Like, we're trying to process that as 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds, in the best way possible. And so when I'm writing, I'm trying to write, as someone who is still processing, someone who is still trying to learn and may not have all of the tools necessary, but we're doing the best we can, right? And at the end of the day, I think that's what you find in my books. You find a Black child that is trying to do the best they can with what they have and hoping that's enough.
So, Karen, what I just heard him say is that if we did a word search of the book, of the words in the book, we won't find fleek anywhere in the book. Like, he's cool enough to know not to use the word on fleek.
That's a couple years back, man. We gotta move with it.
Gotta move forward. Torrin Ellis is here, and the great Kwame Mbalia. Torrin's great as well. Tell me your Black boy joy story. Where's Kwame from? I know that your name, you told me during the break, you were named for Kwame Nkrumah. So I know your dad was socially conscious, steeped in this Africana's space, as we're about to embark upon Marcus Garvey's birthday tomorrow. But tell me about growing up. You went to Howard. I'm assuming based on your T-shirt. I'm making some assumptions about you. But give me your Black boy. Yeah, there you go. Howard, HU. What's your story?
Listen. We could be here. We could be here for a while talking about the Mbalia household growing up.
All right, so let's pick out the thing that inspired you to do the thing that you're doing today.
You know what? It's funny you mentioned Howard. My biggest role model as a writer, as an author, is my mother, Doretha Mbalia. I remember summers when I was 12 or 13, and the idea of college is just beginning to creep over the horizon. I remember being on Howard's campus because my mother would go to Founders Library to do research. And so we're up there, we're running around the yard, we're on Georgia Ave, we're getting beef patties from the Jamaican spot down the street. So it's like seeing the work that she put in and how she enjoyed it, seeing her up at 5 a.m. with her coffee and she's scribbling notes and stuff. And that rubbed off on me. Children will imitate what they see. Right? They will practice what goes on in the household. My daughters, will bust out the pen and they're like, Daddy, I'm working on a new story. I'm changing it into a graphic novel, or I'm doing this. And I'm like, yes, I love to see that. So she was my biggest role model. That was, writing has always been a passion. I didn't know it would turn into a career, but it has always been a passion. But my Black boy joy is the carefree experiences that we got to have because my parents were harbors, right? And provided a safe space for us to be and to exist amidst hostility. I remember catching my first fish I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We went up to, I want to say Door County, Wisconsin, you know, up north, you know, and I caught my first fish and I marched that fish. It was still on the hook. I marched it all the way back to the cabin. I was proud. You know, my dad was like, boy, you better go throw that little thing back in the pond. We can't do nothing with that. That ain't nothing but a mouthful. But I caught my first fish and I remember that moment and I was so happy. And I also remember, you know, 10 to 15 years later, talking to my pops and him being like, you know, we never did that again because the hostility we faced as being the only Black family up there trying to camp and trying to provide y'all that experience. That's why we never did that again. We would always ask, hey, when we going camping again? And we never did that. We went to do other things, you know, but we never did that. We never had that experience again. And I'll always treasure that. And I feel like that is my responsibility as an adult, not just to my children, but to all children out there, especially when I'm writing, is to provide that safe space free of hostility. I think that describes Black boy joy at its core.
Well, talking about description, you know, Kwame, for those that are out driving, may not be in front of a computer, you listed a number of notables in the beginning. What is it that they will experience inside of the book? Can you elaborate a bit on how you kind of combined some of the stories or all of the stories?
Listen here, man, this is the way that I like to describe it is this is a journey. You know, there's 17 stories in here. We are going to provide you with 17 individual pathways towards finding joy, right? And you may see those 17 and be like, you know, those are great, but what about this? What about that? What about 18, 19, or 20? And that's when I'm like, that's when my job as a writer is complete, because you are now been inspired to go out and find your own pathway towards joy. We have science fiction, we have fantasy, we have contemporary. Jason Reynolds wrote a story about ironing his pants and turned it into a masterpiece, right? Being fly for the first day of school. And I'm like, Jason, yeah, I read it. I was like, I hate you, Jason, because that's who takes that topic and makes it into a masterpiece. Lamar Giles, who I call one of the funniest writers, period. And it's why we, you know, lead off with his story. My story is a framing story. My story is a container. It gathers those other 16 pathways and it holds your hand and we walk through them, right? But I consider Lamar's story to be the first story in the book. And I laughed so hard. When I read his story because he's consistently been funny. Check out his other books if you haven't already. But you're gonna laugh. You are going to cry. And you're gonna recognize things and you're gonna be unfamiliar with some things and you're gonna learn something. And I think if you can close a book and you have sparked, you know, we have sparked, you know, created a new wrinkle in your brain, you know, created a conversation that you're having with yourself where you're like, you know, I've never heard of that. I want to learn more. I want to go and find these other authors and read some of their other works. Then that's a job well done. That is a job well done.
How'd you get Kadir Nelson? Because that cover is stunning.
That is all Delacorte and Penguin Random House. Okay. They were like, hey, we're gonna try and do this. And I was like, you're gonna try and get Kadir? I mean, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, so go for it. But you know, I'm not gonna hold my breath. And then he came through, and I was just like, that's it right there. And to see on release day, I was tagged in so many photos of brown boys, you know, with that similar hairstyles, just cheesing. And I was like, all right, this is magic right here.
You know, you talk about Delacorte doing that. They went out and did what you considered perhaps to be the impossible in grabbing that artistry, if you will. But you started to talk about some of the disappointment in 2020 and how the media wasn't necessarily there. Have you experienced any disappointment in the writing process with perhaps other publishers or anything like that? Is there anything that you can share in terms of a disappointment on your creative side?
For me, the pathway to publishing is always going to be littered with disappointments. I think I consider myself incredibly fortunate with my books and the support that I have gotten. But it's hard, you know, it's hard because to do traditional publishing, you know, you have to have an agent, right? You have to have a book considered worthy of having an agent. You've got your agent then takes that book and goes on what's called submission and sends it around to different publishers. And all throughout that process, there are rejections. There are rejections on top of rejections. You ask any writer, any author about their rejections, and you're going to hear that wistful sigh and gaze off into the distance, because I don't care how famous you are, at one point you were getting rejections. And that's a part of the process. And what I tell any writer who is afraid of that process, because I'm still scared of it, I still send stuff off and I'm just like, I don't want to hear anything from anybody, for another month or so. But what I tell all writers, who are aspiring to be published authors, I'm like, is you have to submit, right? You are going to meet gatekeepers who are going to say, oh, your work isn't good enough, or your work isn't Black enough, or your work isn't manly enough, or this, that, or the other, right? All along your process, you're going to get criticism from readers, you're going to get criticism within the industry. But the first gatekeeper you're going to meet is going to be yourself, and choosing whether or not you're going to submit. Do not gatekeep yourself. Always submit. Let them say no. That is the worst thing that can happen, is they say no. It's
that's
when they
a whole
say yes.
sermon. Pause on that. People got to sit in that. Do not gatekeep yourself. That's got to be the message from here to eternity. Oh my goodness. Kwame Mbalia is here.